accent challenge. Oh, it's gonna be lovely. It's gonna be so good. What else are you gonna do with your month? Why not? Come on, give it a go. Yeah, I can definitely do it.
The accent challenge is quite splendid indeed.
Would you like some tea? Why, yes, but one couldn't drink tea out of that monstrosity. RP, received pronunciation. BBC English. The Queen's English. Oxford English. Standard Southern British English. What exactly is RP? RP is a complicated mess of history, class, education, and an awful lot of disagreement. So this week we're going to try and put some of these things that everyone disagrees on into some sort of order so that if you have to do an RP accent, you know which version of RP to do. Received pronunciation, received meaning accepted, was first coined in the year 1869. It was taught to pupils, of course largely men in those days, who went to very posh schools and were preparing to go to universities such as Oxford or Cambridge. And they needed a standard of speaking so that these people could be understood all over the world, in and around the colonies as well as in the UK. And then in 1922, the BBC decided, as such, it would be the standard English spoken on all broadcast, hence why we now refer to it also as BBC English. There are three types of RP. Conservative RP, or heightened RP, is associated with the aristocracy, usually an old-fashioned accent spoken by older generations nowadays. Mainstream RP, which is what people who have no sort of indicators in terms of age, occupation, it's the most standard, very, very neutral accent. And contemporary RP, which is the RP spoken, it's sort of this type of accent, it's in London, so usually it's sort of a combination of some sounds which are very RP and some sounds which we'll discuss today which are a little bit softer, leaning a little bit towards working class, and this largely has to do with society. The good thing about RP in general, in terms of how it began, was it was actually intended to stop people judging each other based on where they came from and just to teach people who were getting an education one way to speak that would eliminate any kind of judgment based on region. However, it just turned into a giant explosion of judgment based on class and education, and nowadays, thankfully, a lot of people are rebelling against that. Largely broadcasters such as the BBC are helping by incorporating a lot more people, even in the news and radio and on programmes and series that have accents which are not BBC English. It was also really important for people internationally. If you think about colonial times, there were people learning and speaking English all over the world, and essentially they had to sort of decide on a version to teach them so that everyone could understand everybody else. So it's a very complicated accent. That's actually not one accent, it's actually quite a few different accents. And I'll try to go through what's what, and I'm going to provide you all with a chart of sort of sounds as we go, which you'll get tomorrow. This will be a sort of indicator from more modern, less posh, up to
very posh indeed.
Lovely. Exactly. So without further ado, let's get started on today, which are consonants. Okay, so the first important thing we need to talk about with consonants in general, not just for RP but for every accent we're going to approach in this month, are the two types of consonants. Do you know what they are? Any ideas? Some of you know, I think. Some of you may not. So consonants are categorized into two different categories, really three different categories, but we'll get to that later. Right now we're going to focus on the two important ones, which are voiced and voiceless or unvoiced, depending on which linguist you talk to and their particular opinion, etc. And the reason these are important is they largely affect particularly our rhythm when we're speaking, And for those of you who have learnt English as a non-native language, these are going to be very, very important for you guys in order to get your accent sounding really flawless. So let's pretend we're 5 years old and we're back in school. And imagine that the teacher says to you, that's my teacher face, obviously. Okay, what sound does this make? What would you say? You'd probably say something like ta. Can you whisper that sound? Try it now. T, t. Is it still accurate? Is that still the right sound? Yeah, it still is. So t. The sound of a T, t, is it voiced or voiceless? It's voiceless. Why? Because you don't need your voice to produce the sound correctly. Now, try this one. What sound does it make? Duh. Of course. Duh, duh, duh. Yes. Now try to whisper it. No, you still used your voice, I'm betting. Really try to whisper. Ta, ta, ta. Can you hear, if you whisper it, what actually happens is that the sound you're making is not a D. What sound is it? It's a T. No matter how hard you try to make a D sound, if you're not using your voice, if you're not producing resonance coming out of your vocal cords and resonating in your mouth, etc., that sound is going to sound like a T, and we're going to hear it as a T and not a D. There are all kinds of pairs of sounds in English that have this same pattern. P and B. Which one is voiceless and which one is voiced? P is voiceless and B is voiced. What about a K and a G? Which one is voiced? G. The G sound is voiced and K is voiceless. K, G. So we've got all kinds of pairs of these two types of sounds, and I've included in your notes for today a handy dandy little chart that's got them all listed out for you. As I said, they may not be super important in every context, but they will come into play. And really, really to emphasize, if you have learned English as a language that's not your first language, this is going to be very important to you in terms of your rhythm. So, without further ado, let's look at some of the things that make RP consonants curious. Now, there are a few very common mistakes that people make when they're doing an RP accent, and primarily when we're talking about consonants, the main one is to sort of talk like this and make the consonants very prominent and very heavy. Oh dear, nobody talks like that. You're never going to sound natural if that's how you're speaking. You also hear people sort of go into this voice. Getting a bit lost, obviously I'm exaggerating. And we also hear people sort of ending up somewhere up here, and they've changed their pitch, but they haven't removed their sounds, like ours. Depending obviously on where you come from, there are a lot of errors that people make in RP, so we're going to try and give you some, we're going to try and give you some tips to avoid making those mistakes and talk about some of the most prominent things that you can work on in order for your RP to sound natural and not completely over the top, no matter which version of the accent you're doing. So, first thing, if you put your hands just on the side of your face, okay, remember all of that fun jaw stuff we did yesterday? It was for a reason, we're not done there. What you're going to do from here is to try and talk, and we want to think of RP consonants as being very specific, okay? So instead of thinking about them as being very pronounced, I want you to just do this with your hand for a second. You can move your hands off your face, just for a second, like that. Tap, 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 tappy, 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 tap, 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 tap. Having too much fun, sorry. That's what I want you to think of them as. Just sort of a very, very light, very precise movements of these muscles of your mouth. And the thing that's going to give you away is going to be your jaw. 90% of the time when people have sort of an over-the-top, it doesn't sound natural accent, it's because of their jaw muscle. So back to this little hands on your face position. and I want you to just start making some little T sounds. And remember that the T you can whisper, so we're going to whisper it. And I want you to look at yourself in the mirror and see if you're doing this. Notice that after I make a T, my tongue goes right down to my bottom teeth again. It does not do this. There's no forward-back movement. And it's also not doing this. There's no jaw movement, just the tongue. Okay, see if you can do that. And then after you do the T, we're going to change it to the voiced version of the same movement, which is what? A D. So smart, so clever, and handsome, and beautiful. My goodness, you're fabulous. A D. Da, 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 da. And you might notice, depending on what your current and natural accent is, that if you're trying to make a D with your jaw relaxed, da, 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 your tongue might touch a different place on that alveolar ridge, which you now know what it is from yesterday, I hope. Your tongue might touch slightly farther back than it used to, or it might even touch slightly farther forward. Here's again what we don't want, da, 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 da. So this is something that we're going to work on throughout, which is we want the vowels to be longer and more relaxed than the consonants. So instead of da, 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 we want da, 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 da. And the reason that that's important is going to come into account when we get into intonation and rhythm and connecting all of our sounds together and syllable stress and word stress and all that kind of fun stuff. So this is an exercise. I want you to pause the video. If you go into your documents today, you'll see I've written it all out. Essentially, you're going to go through all of the consonant sounds like this and see if you can figure out which ones you need your jaw. So which sounds do you need to close your mouth in order to make? And which sounds can you actually make precisely and accurately and tappy, tappy, tappy without closing your jaw? So I'll give you one. An example of one that you cannot make from this relaxed jaw position is an S. You can't get enough tension in your tongue to make that S unless your jaw is slightly closed. But if you then say a word like san, what we want is as soon as you use that muscle to make that S or whatever other consonant sound you need it in order to make, as soon as it's done its work, it's just gonna, finished, lovely, excellent. Taking a break, time for a cup of tea. Go and practice, and I'll see you in a second. Some sounds you must pay attention to in whatever variation of RP you're doing. These sounds are things like TH. We never eliminate a TH. There's no such thing as over there, over there, with a very nice there. Keep your tongue relaxed, place it in between your top and your bottom teeth, there, there. There are two versions of TH, voiced and voiceless. So we've got TH like in there, which is voiced, and TH like in think, which is not. Be very careful that you're always pronouncing these correctly, no matter what RP accent you're doing. The other sound to watch and be very aware of is your NG, or ING, ONG, whatever the sound is in the word. So be careful with things like singing. If you can see, ing, 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 ing. The tip of my tongue is behind my bottom teeth. I am certainly not making an N sound. Singin', singin'. That's not what we're after. Singing. And if you'll notice as well, there's no k or g at the end of the word. So it's not sinking or singing. None of that. The reason that that might happen is because if your tongue is very, very tense at the back, it's going to create a little bit of extra friction and we're going to hear that little explosion of air coming out. The way to eliminate that is to simply lift your tongue and then relax it down. Ing. And stop your voice before it moves down. Okay, so you can practice that. Now there are a few sounds that are very different between one accent and the other accent. For example, If you are speaking in a conservative or heightened RP accent, such as this one, there's a thing called a flappy R. Again, I do love these terms. Flappy, honestly. What a flappy R is any time we have an R which is between two vowels. If you're doing a very traditional or a very old-fashioned RP accent, let's go even further with it, shall we? We would say, for example, very instead of very, and married instead of married. The way we do this is just to take our tongue and tap it very, 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 very quickly on the alveolar ridge. Anytime you have a vowel and an R and a vowel, if you're very posh indeed, you have that option, okay? If you're going to do an accent which is more heightened or conservative RP, such as this one, we almost never use the glottal stop. Do you know what a glottal stop is? A glottal stop is the noise that comes in your throat. It's not really a noise, in fact, it's more of a stopping of noise. It comes into very London accents, working class, Cockney, those types of accents, in words like better, I'm very fond of raving. That little is called a glottal stop, and it happens when you close your vocal cords and then spring them open, and then the sound is released. And in many accents we use that glottal stop instead of pronouncing a proper T sound. Now, in heightened RP, there's only one instance when you are allowed to use that glottal stop, and that is when, if you have a T and the next sound is a consonant that is made with your tongue in the same position on your alveolar ridge. So, for example, if I were to say something like, what time, since what ends in a T and the following word time also begins with a T, and of course they happen in the same part of the mouth, there's no need to repeat the T. What time? That sounds a little bit again like a rave. What time? 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 Not very heightened RP at all. Other sounds that we do this with are the N, S, Z, D, for example, because they all are made with your tongue in that same place on your alveolar ridge. They're listed in the document, so don't worry about remembering them. You can practice it, and you'll find that it makes very good sense indeed. However, we always pronounce the T at the end of a line. Please never say something like, last night, because then your accent is simply gone. What a shame that would be. Last night. Put a nice little precise, soft T on the end and you'll sound absolutely fabulous. If you're doing a more contemporary RP accent, this is a little bit different. So we're going to commonly use the glottal stop nowadays, both when we have a word ending in a T and the next word begins with a consonant. But unlike the conservative or heightened RP, it can be any consonant. So we would say that time, that guy, that mother. It doesn't matter what the consonant is, we're going to use that glottal stop and that mother rather than that mother. That mother might be something you would say, for example, if you're playing a character who's giving a speech or who has quite a high class, even in modern day, or is in politics, or all of these things factor into our accents. But that's commonly accepted, it's still considered RP. The thing that you cannot do in either accent, to be really careful of, is not to use this glottal stop in the middle of a word. So we're never going to say something like better. That would be very, very London sounding, letter, better. And we're not going to do that. We're always going to put the T's in the middle, better, letter. It doesn't matter which accent we're doing. At the end of a sentence, if you're doing very contemporary RP, you can remove that T. So you could say something like, I want that, instead of I want that. It's still probably best to put the T on, but that's just dependent on you and your mouth and how easily you stay in the accent and how easily you could slip into something that's like a little bit more Londony. I want that. We don't want to end up there. So play around with the T's and see what feels kind of natural for you. Like I said, I would encourage you to try pronouncing the T's at the ends of lines. Don't worry about pronouncing them if the next word begins with another consonant, okay? You'll see all of this written in your email, so if your head is going, what? It's fine. It's all written down for you and you can practice. The last consonant sound, well, sort of consonant sound, that we're going to talk about today and come back to again tomorrow is the R sound, as in R. So depending on your original accent, this might take a little bit of work to learn when to pronounce it and when not to pronounce it. And it's one of the things that sort of gives people away if they get it off or a bit wrong. It's instantly recognizable that they're putting on an accent rather than just sounding like this is the way they actually talk. So there are rules for this. For those of you who've learnt English as a non-native language, you're going to be like, rules? But really, are they rules? Can I do the rules all the time? What are the 50 million exceptions to it? No, there are actual rules, I promise you. And they're very simple. So rule number 1. If a word ends in an R sound, the R is gone. So we're going to say here, there, not here, there. Rule number 2, when the R is before a consonant, it's gone. So we're going to say girl, born, heart, not girl, born, heart. Rule number 3, when the R is before a vowel, of course we pronounce it, otherwise we sound a little bit drunk. So obviously we're going to say area, not aya. That would be quite fun to make a sketch of. Where's my area? Maybe one day. Accent challenge, feature film called No R's. So funny. Aren't I so funny? Rule number 4 is very important, and I'm going to mention it now and come back to it on Thursday when we talk about connection and how we link words together and sounds together, etc., to sound natural. And rule number 4 is, if we have a situation where a word ends in an R sound and the next word begins with a vowel sound, basically rule number 3 wins over the other 2. So take an example like here is. In context, we're not going to say here is because we sound a bit weird. Here is. So what most people do is, in order not to sound like that, they end up breaking up the words and they stop their voice for a moment in between. Here is, and we use that sort of glottalized to start the word is. And that sounds a little bit odd if you do it too much. It breaks up your rhythm and it makes you sound very unnatural in the accent. So instead, to connect the words together, we're going to pronounce the R, but I want you to imagine that the R just jumps over from the word here to the word is. So instead of here is, it sounds more like here is, here is, here is. There are, not there are, there are. So all of these little sounds that I'm making, born, girl, there, they're all a little bit different. And they do change depending on which variety of RP you're doing. So since they're vowels, we're going to take a look at all of those sounds tomorrow with the other vowels. But I just want you to be aware of these 4 rules, particularly if you have an accent in which you usually pronounce your R sounds all of the time. A couple of other quick sounds worth mentioning are when we have a TR combination together in a word. In contemporary RP, we change this to a sort of CH sound. So we would say trial instead of try. And likewise, if it's D and then an R, we would change it to sort of a J and an R. So we would say something more like drive as opposed to drive. I look like I'm milking a cow, don't I? Milk your cow as you drive. So if you're doing the heightened or conservative RP accent, that's something to really practice. You want to really get that try, drive, without changing it to try, drive. And the way to go about that is like what we did at the beginning. Go back to this sort of very relaxed, nothing face, and look in the mirror and see if you can do it only moving your tongue. Try, drive. And you might feel that when you make the R, the tip of your tongue has to go up It doesn't touch anything in your mouth, but it sort of, this is the ridge. If it makes the T, it's going tur, like that. Tur, tur, der. And it's not touching anything, and your mouth is very, very relaxed, and your lips can be very relaxed as well. If you make your lips pucker forward, ch, tur, what that does is it closes the space in your mouth. It makes it very small. And if that space is quite small, your tongue doesn't have as much room to make that movement, and the sides are going to start hitting into your teeth, and you're going to accidentally end up making this ch sound instead of try. So that's something that just happens with linguistic evolution over time. Our mouths sort of resort to whatever the easiest option is. So if you're going to do a sort of old-fashioned accent, you have to keep in mind that they would have actually had elocution lessons and learned to make that movement sound natural, and you're going to have to do the same. Sorry. So that's it for the consonants. If you have any questions, particularly those of you for whom English is not your native language, if there are any sounds that you have a lot of difficulty pronouncing, please write them either in a message to me or in the Facebook group, and I'll get back to you with how to pronounce those sounds. I haven't gone into every single consonant and how to pronounce it for obvious reasons, but if there's a sound like a J, for example, or Y, or, you know, whatever sound that you sort of feel is difficult for you to pronounce, please just ask. Don't let it just go like, oh, I guess I'll never say that right. Ask me and I will help you with pronouncing that. Okay? In the meantime, I've listed some little task challenges for the day, so take a look at those. You've got some references of people to listen to. You've got a little listening exercise I'd like you to do. And I will see you tomorrow for some vowels, which is where the real fun begins.
Have a lovely day. See you tomorrow.
I've got a rhinoceros, a rhino.